This is the Honourable Member's inaugural speech. I give the call to the Honourable Sandra Carr.
President, thank you. I congratulate you on your election to the role of President and for the leadership you promptly demonstrated in making the honorific of President gender neutral. I'm heartened by such an immediate modernising action and look forward to working in this place under your leadership. I also congratulate the Honourable Martin Aldridge for his election to the role of Deputy President and additionally look forward to learning from his experience and leadership. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we stand, the proud Wadjak people of the Noongar Nation. I thank them for allowing me to stand upon their land. I acknowledge the traditional leaders, past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, traditions, cultures and hopes of the traditional owners of this land. I further acknowledge the election of the first Indigenous person to serve in this place, the Honourable Rosie Sahana, and look forward to the knowledge, experience and insights she will bring to inform and improve the work we do here. President, I rise here today and proudly bear the weight of responsibility that comes with representing an electorate, the agricultural region. It is without embarrassment or pretensions of humility that I confess I am exceptionally average, an identity in which I find both comfort and belonging. An average West Australian-born, English-speaking woman elected from the extraordinarily unlikely position of third on the ticket, or the Labor ticket no less, for the agricultural region. I found myself in the perfect storm of circumstances of a landslide Labor victory due to the excellent leadership of Premier Mark McGowan and the WA Labor team. I am here off the back of the work of some outstanding people, many well known and more still who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes, and I do not hesitate to acknowledge that this exceptionally average person is here teetering upon the shoulders of those giants. Given this and the great depth of knowledge, skill and experience around me, both in this place and the other place, the temptation to surrender to imposter syndrome is significant. Yet I work to remind myself that government should be, at their core, representative, and the fact that I bring my mediocrity with me has fundamental value. President, following your lead in having modernised the language of this place, I would like to also follow the leadership of some of my former students when they recently spoke publicly on climate change. These young people taught me, as young people so often do, that I should begin by advising that I identify by the pronouns she, her. In my case, pronouns that readily match with my presentation and thus afford me the luxury of not challenging the status quo. As such, I again find myself one of the exceptionally average, and consequently find myself with the responsibility and privilege that comes with falling within the majority. The responsibility falls upon us all to normalise being able to self-determine the pronouns by which one identifies and to demonstrate unqualified acceptance and inclusion of those who do not sit within the comfortable majority. Being part of a majority carries with it profound responsibility. The work that we do in this term of government, with the majority we hold in both houses, presents some incredible opportunities and along with it significant responsibility. We are charged with setting the tone and opportunities for future generations, a mandate set for us by the voters of Western Australia. They have unequivocally placed their faith in us, and from that faith we have opportunity to birth a future filled with renewed optimism for what is possible for Western Australia. The evolution of life within the walls of this place is evident upon the walls of the chamber floor of this building, upon which hangs an oil painting of the original Legislative Council, a group of white privileged men resplendent in finery that is reflective of our inherited Westminster system and the House of Lords upon which our Legislative Council is based. Today, I am surrounded by increasing diversity. Women, men, the first Sudanese person to be elected to Parliament in the Honourable Ayor Chuot, and the first Indigenous Australian to be elected to the Legislative Council in the Honourable Rosie Sahana, and the first Serbian-born person to be elected in the Honourable Klara Andrić. We are a comprehensive collection of cultural backgrounds, values, beliefs, professions and life experiences, all accepted and equally valued. But for the work, determination and sacrifices of those who came before us, those who advocated and fought for rights, recognition, inclusion and change, many of us would not be in this place today. And I take a moment to express my gratitude to those in this state, across the country and throughout the world who advocate for change, who fight for the rights of the disadvantaged, the exploited, the marginalised and ignored. I am inspired by their efforts and vow to continue to work for equity, fairness and rights for all. It is appropriate at this point that I should take a moment to pay tribute to one such changemaker, Edith Cowan. This year marks 100 years since the election of Edith Cowan as the very first woman to be elected to Parliament in Australia, and many of us here today owe a great debt of gratitude to her for having doggedly prized open the firmly shut door that seemed determined to remain closed to women. But for the strength, determination, passion and indeed gumption of Edith Cowan, many of us would not be here in this place. This year, we are privileged to witness the good many firsts for women in both this place and the other place. In the electorate I represent, for the first time, voters have elected 2 Labor women in the agricultural region, my colleague, the Honourable Shelley Payne, and me. Edith Cowan was born in the agricultural region at Glengarry, near my hometown of Geraldton, and her legacy in working for the rights and social welfare of women and children is admirable. She understood the fundamental importance of education as key to addressing social problems. She worked to improve conditions for families, the poor, the undereducated and the elderly. She promoted sex education in schools, migrant welfare, the development of infant health centres, fought against domestic violence, drunkenness and spoke openly about venereal disease, prostitution, contraception, illegitimacy and sex crimes. She advocated for disadvantaged groups, public education, the rights of children born to single mothers, and helped found the Children's Protection Society, the creation of which paved way for the Children's Court. Cowan also played a key role in the development of the King Edward Memorial Hospital. Thus, not only was she instrumental in creating the hospital in which my daughter Claudia was born, she also pushed through the legislation which allowed women to be involved in the legal profession, the Women's Legal Status Act of 1923, which paved the way for Claudia to be the lawyer that she is today. I do not pretend to know what would be in the mind of Edith Cowan if she were to look upon the 41st Parliament of Western Australia. Yet I cannot help but imagine a momentary satisfied smile upon her lips before she turned her mind and attention to the Cabinet and other matters related to social welfare, the smile replaced by a determined set to her brow and a renewed goal in mind. It is the great many incredible women leaders who have come before us in politics, such as Edith Cowan, Joan Kirner, Carmen Lawrence, Julia Gillard. The sartorial choices I've made today paying tribute to Julia Gillard, Penny Wong, Tanya Pilbasek, Sue Lyons, and internationally women such as Jacinda Ardern and Kamala Harris, whose determined feet have stood fast and broken the hardened ground upon which women such as myself now dare to tread. Here, I pay tribute to the effectiveness of WA Labor's Towards 50 initiative, and to those who would discredit such initiatives, I direct you to the great body of research on unconscious bias. Gillard's progressive work in the space of education and climate change were inspired, and her ongoing work in women's leadership see her positive impact continue today. I will forever find strength in the words of her iconic misogyny speech as a show of the true strength of women as I carry out my service in this place. And I heed her advice to call out sexism early. I will not tolerate it for myself or others in any space. I will not. President, Kalgoorlie, 1971. I was born to young parents Anne and Warren Kennedy, both of whom had left school by the age of 15 to enter the workforce. I was unremarkably named Sandra after a blonde woman who lived down the road, who my mum admired. I was welcomed by an older sister by 18 months, Karen, who now enjoys the appropriation of her name to summarise a set of values and behaviours our current younger generation love to ridicule. However, I must note here that our Karen is a dynamic, hard-working, kind and generous woman who has worked long and hard to build an incredibly successful small business. When I hear the name Karen, for me, it conjures all good things and a profound sense of love and admiration. As a small child, I lived to tell the tales of accidentally drinking from a glass of kerosene, having mistaken it for water, and in another fever of stupidity, inhaling a small plastic diamond, presuming it safe to drink as a faux sugar cube, Suffice to say, I am somewhat of an accident of survival. In my early years, we made our way from Kalgoorlie to Geraldton, where my dad went to play football for Brigades Football Club. And in their spare time, he and my mum inexplicably produced my baby brother Todd, who my sister and I dressed and fawned over like he was our own personal living doll, which I later balanced with cruel teasing, or worse, as we grew older. My brother is an intelligent and kind-hearted soul who finds great reward in helping others. He is humble and at his most animated when he has emerged from a great surf or having helped teach our young West Aussies to surf. The joy with which he tells the story of helping a young autistic man to surf stays with me as representative of his kind, caring and compassionate heart. My hometown of Geraldton is the traditional land of the southern Yamatji people. Being a port town, my family home sat beneath the looming shadows and strange noises of the soaring wheat silos, and we considered the wharf upon which the silos sat an extension of our backyard, a place we played, swam, fished and stole onto foreign ships to meet the crews from exotic worlds as we tried to communicate in unknown languages. An innocence now stolen from our young people and community by the experience of the 9/11 terror attacks, causing the wharf to be closed off to the public. I lived walking distance from the town centre, a hop and skip across hot sand to gemstone blue oceans, and a slow, reluctant dawdle to the local public schools. Like so many Western Australians, I enjoyed the benefit of a public education, attending the oldest continually operating primary school in Western Australia, Geraldton Primary School, established in 1878. I have fond memories of playing elastics, dressing like they did in the olden days during the school's centenary year in 1978, being labelled Sandy from Greece by my Year 2 teacher, and years of playing netball and basketball with my schoolmates. And I hold some not-so-fond memories too, most notably the terror of the angry roar of Mr. Bob the Tyrant Bryant, who was often booming great bowls of fire or hell's bells. And while I can accept he may have been a Jerry Lee Lewis fan, I find it too much of a stretch to imagine the woolen sweater vest-wearing dictator was an AC/DC fan. These fits of rage inevitably resulted in someone in consultation with Dr. Jarrah, a ruler he so named as it was his corporal cure for our apparent wrongdoings. I note now the ruler was in fact made of pine, but can confirm that its sting was no less so, despite his poor skills in timber identification. I finally escaped the lash of Dr. Jarrah to attend Geraldton Senior High School, a school attended by former Labor Premier Jeff Gallop, and during my high school years, and indeed many of the years that followed, I could never have imagined I would be following in his much-admired footsteps to the West Australian Parliament. High school proved somewhat of a revelation for me, as I'd always believed myself an average student, drifting through my school years somewhat unremarkably, happy to seamlessly blend in as a generally shy and uncertain child. Regardless, Geraldton Senior High School was a place in which I was blessed with some excellent teachers, a credit to the public education system, who identified in me that which I could not identify in myself. They harangued and encouraged me. They berated me for my lackadaisical approach and for not fulfilling my potential. They alerted me to my intelligence. However, the siren song of the ocean remained strong, and my high school years were largely spent prioritising time on the beach with friends, playing sport, and enjoying the freedom of that cliched notion of a simpler time. Even during my Year 12 TE exams, as they were known at that time, I felt none of the pressure I see suffered by students attempting ATAR today. And for this reason, I'm heartened to see the range of pathways that have more recently been established for students to attend university or to complete their further education ambitions. Throughout my schooling years, I was fortunate to be blissfully ignorant of the fiscal gap that separated many of us. My family were battlers, and all about me were friends from families of business owners, doctors, fishing families, farming families, teachers and other professionals. Yet somehow I remained unaware and unbothered by the vast financial divide that separated many of us. That is part of the beauty of regional living. There is generally space for inclusion, and pretensions or distinctions due to wealth are typically not appreciated. It was only in my early adult years, when my mum spoke of our financial struggles, that I began to truly appreciate the significance of the sacrifices my parents made for our family. This is most tellingly revealed in a simple story my mum shared of once splurging on a can of aerosol deodorant, only to drop it and have the can burst and empty of its contents, and her crying at the great waste they could ill afford. My dad, who is one of 14 children of Maud and William or Bill Kennedy, tells stories of the great poverty in which he grew up, going hungry, sharing veranda space that doubled as bedrooms, and meowing like a cat at his dad's heel in the hope of being thrown extra table scraps when the meal had not been sufficient to fill his grumbling stomach. My nana, Maud Kennedy, or Midnight Maud as she was affectionately known, was an incredible matriarch, a woman who stoically and miraculously held her family together when my pop's own unknown demons saw him spend his money on medicinal amber rather than on substantively supporting his 14 children. This responsibility eventually fell upon my dad's older brother, Reginald Kennedy, or Red as he is known to most, who worked in the mines and sent money home to support his brothers and sisters. My mum's family was also a large Kalgoorlie clan. Stella Isabella and Jack Turner had 10 children. My grandma Stella had a wicked sense of humour and suffered from acute depression, a condition for which I'm told she had electric shock therapy. I also have my own memories of her hiding in a darkened room, holding a single candle in silent terror whenever there was thunder or lightning. And those who have some understanding of mental health and intergenerational trauma will have no difficulty imagining the impact of this upon others in the family and generations to follow, mental health being a subject I will return to later. My granddad Jack was in the army and worked as a cook, spending time in Northampton to defend our shores during the war, Northampton being a part of the agricultural region I now represent. He never knew his own father, and it is for this reason that I and others were always in awe of his capacity to be a great and caring dad and granddad. He was hit by a car as a young man and had to have his leg pinned together, which became infected, and the same leg was injured again in a later accident. As a result, he had one leg much shorter than the other and it could not bend. He wore a boot with a thick sole of about 7 centimetres to even his stance. He walked with a limp and had a bicycle with a single pedal that he rode one-legged to work on the mines. And it was a highlight for us grandchildren to get a ride on Granddad's bike. He was a determined and dependable man, a loyal and staunch Labor man, and like one of his favourite songs, he remains unforgettable. The stories my parents tell of their respective childhoods are overwhelmingly positive, but needless to say, life was challenging for both my parents' large families. They were the classic Aussie battlers that form part of our national identity. They know both struggle, and their lives are, as are those of many Australians, a triumph over adversity. But more than this, they are a triumph of growing up having to care for and support one another, to share the load, to look out for each other and know the importance of family and true grit to ensure survival. Consequently, my parents are both caring and compassionate people. They look out for others, help others. Many is the time we had people in need and family members staying in our home, sometimes for a short time, at others for the better part of a year. My parents coached our sporting teams, volunteered at our schools, volunteered in various groups and organisations, and to this day remain deeply embedded in their community and the notion of service. They are my greatest supporters and always provide a soft place for me to land when life has been challenging. They love me without condition, and I'm so incredibly grateful for them both. It was my dad who some years ago first planted the idea that I should enter politics, and who also offered his unhesitating support when I sought his counsel when considering nominating as a candidate for the agricultural region. My mum, despite her initial hesitations, as I imagine protective mothers so often feel when one of their own enters politics, threw herself behind me by single-handedly manning the Chapman Valley polling booth on election day, braving her neighbours from the traditional Nationals territory in support of her daughter. And if that's not love, I don't know what is. As part of the Kennedy family, it is a particular privilege for me to be delivering my inaugural speech during Reconciliation Week. This year's Reconciliation Week theme is more than a word, reconciliation takes action. And I am pleased that I'll be able to take action here today to formally amend the record of my own family history. I am deeply honoured to acknowledge and place on record here today that my family history dates back to our First Nations people. I am less proud, however, of our historic treatment and undervaluing of our traditional landowners, the impact of which is evident in so many ways in our society, one of which is in my own family history, in which the fact that our blood runs with that of the traditional landowners was largely kept hidden, having been the subject, I am told, of an enforced silence. Today, I am very grateful to my uncle, Mervyn Kennedy, who has dedicated significant time, energy and passion into researching our family history to bring the fullness of our origins to our attention and having our Indigenous heritage recognised by the South West Aboriginal Land and Sea Council. I am incredibly grateful to the South West Aboriginal Land and Sea Council in that, after all this time and silence, they are willing to acknowledge and welcome us. If only other institutions in this country would exercise the same spirit of generosity towards our First Nations people. My uncle relates our early West Australian history thus. Great-grandfather William John Kennedy made his way to Western Australia, acquiring land in Cunderdin and Currading, marrying into the Walker family, farmers in the Avon region. We come from the King and Kennedy families who resided in Northam, Cunderdin and York. Great-grandfather King married Eliza Bell, née Dickerson Skelton. Her mother, Mary Braisley, was an Aboriginal woman who hailed from Gin Gin and the Moore River settlements with links back to the famous tribal elder known as Wilbur. Much of this history is new to me, and for this reason I feel an ever-increasing urgency to say we must be vigilant in questioning and examining the negative biases that lurk within us. As is always the case when a group is marginalised, devalued or disadvantaged, we frequently unconsciously reinforce these in our behaviours, words and in our actions. It is important that we take pause to reflect and ask ourselves what words, beliefs do we have whispering in the back of our subconscious minds that have the unintended impact of reinforcing disadvantage. We must ask ourselves what conscious action can we take to address these biases. It is my most sincere hope that my action here today goes some small way to reconciling my family history with that which has been hidden and can more broadly be viewed as a positive gesture of reconciliation. Adopting the Uluru Statement from the Heart would be another such important act of reconciliation. My journey to this place is a story of exploration, stops and starts, and life-changing mistakes. While in my late teens, I was the victim of sexual violence, and this naturally has had a significant impact upon my worldview and my own mental health. It led me to make self-destructive choices, such as entering and remaining in relationships that were abusive, coercive and violent. It is important that I acknowledge these experiences, as again they represent the experiences of so many women. And they drive me to be part of the process that works to address these ongoing social problems. It is why I now sit on the board of Desert Blue Connect, an organisation providing a range of services to individuals and organisations in the Midwest, including children's services, crisis accommodation, unplanned pregnancy support, family and domestic violence and sexual assault support, primary prevention and men's community intervention. Following the trauma in my late teens, despite starting a range of courses and degrees, I found it difficult to settle, to feel safe, secure, to build significant connections or relationships, or indeed any sense of self-worth. I began and withdrew from a series of degrees, behaviour reflecting my inner turmoil, from a fine arts degree to sports science, then politics, philosophy and sociology, then 3 years of law, during which time I also married, had my daughter, followed by the subsequent end of my marriage and my return to my family in Geraldton as a sole parent. At that time, there were limited concessions for sole parents and external studies were yet to be commonplace. So despite my attempts at persuasion, I was not permitted to complete so much as a unit of my law degree externally. So I once again withdrew. Sometime after, I met my son's father and completed a Bachelor of Arts followed by a graduate diploma in education. And these important steps allowed me to redesign my life path and that of my children. Since becoming a teacher, I have taught in schools throughout Geraldton and travelled throughout the Midwest, Gascoyne and Wheatbelt areas, delivering drug and health education. I've held numerous leadership roles and positions, along with gaining a renewed sense of self and a vehement belief in the power of education to transform lives. As one whose sense of self-worth was minimal throughout my younger and early parenting years, I found myself in a series of abusive relationships and experienced family and domestic violence. I still do not fully comprehend the complexity of my thinking that caused me to be in such a position. Yet I can say with absolute certainty that those who find themselves in such predicaments need your absolute compassion, understanding and support. We simply must do more to help people in those situations and to educate our community to help enable helpful dialogues and primary prevention initiatives. An estimated nearly 300,000 West Australians have experienced physical or sexual violence from a current or former partner, 1 in 6 women and 1 in 16 men. Collectively, they would fill the Optus Stadium almost 5 times over, and I would be in one of those stadiums. 1 in 4 women have experienced emotional abuse caused by a current or former partner. That is twice the population of both Geraldton and Bunbury combined. In a group the size of an average primary school class, 1 in 3 children will have witnessed domestic violence, and Aboriginal women are 32 times more likely to be hospitalised for family violence-related assaults. On average, 1 woman is murdered by her current or former partner each week in Australia, a statistic I barely avoided becoming when a former partner threw a hammer at me in anger, narrowly missing me and hitting the wall beside my head. I congratulate Minister Simone McGurk as WA's First Minister for the Prevention of Family and Domestic Violence. Her significant work in the development of the Path to Safety, Western Australia's strategy to reduce family and domestic violence, represents a substantial paradigm shift from the approach of previous governments. 1 in every 3 women in Australia has experienced physical or sexual violence perpetrated by a man since the age of 15. And I've already discussed the impact on my own life experience, causing me to pinball through life making poor choices. This reference to the experience of women is not to deny that men and those who identify as they are not victims of sexual and/or physical violence. The statistics show us that they are. However, it is to say that those experiencing these social problems are overwhelmingly females and children, and it is to say that as a society we have a problem that we must collectively address. Entitlement, notions of proprietary rights and a culture that has historically made light of the suffering and value of women is both causal and accountable. I will stop short of using the popularised term toxic masculinity as a means by which to denote the cultural norms that allow for such alarming rates of family and domestic violence and sexual violence and the general undervaluing of women in society. Words are powerful tools and should be used thoughtfully and intentionally. And it is my observation that the term toxic masculinity is prone to divide rather than assist. It generates a defensiveness from that half of the population that feels labelled and attacked by the nomenclature. It is my ardent belief that toxic socialisation is the better language, as it carries with it the notion of our collective responsibility to socialise all our young people to be respectful, empathetic and proactive in building attitudes that respect and protect the rights of all. I am, after all, the parent of a young man, and my role is also to allow him to see his own value and worth, while simultaneously seeing, respecting and supporting the same in others. It was only upon extricating myself from the situations of family and domestic violence that I succumbed to panic attacks, anxiety and depression, and so began the long journey of addressing the mental health impacts, not only upon myself, but upon my children. Unfortunately, these experiences also place me in a far too common statistic. However, it is also, as is also often the case with our negative experiences, there were some helpful outcomes too. My life experience allowed me to teach from a place of compassion and trauma-informed practice, long before this became a concept delivered in teacher professional development. It helped inform my pastoral care of students, allowing me to more readily recognise trauma and mental health struggles in students and therefore be of assistance and support. For this, I am grateful. As a sole parent, I have for much of the time been the sole provider for my children, at times juggling up to 3 jobs so I could ensure my children were well provided for. My experience is not unusual. More than 80% of sole parents in Australia are women. That being the case, women retire with less superannuation, are more likely to retire in poverty, and, amongst older women, are increasingly likely to experience homelessness. Despite my life challenges, or perhaps because of them, I am proud of how I have consistently worked to do and be better. Most importantly, I'm incredibly proud of my 2 children, who are my reason for always wanting to do better. I am here in this place in the hope that it makes them proud. My daughter Claudia, who is now a lawyer and has worked as a lecturer and tutor at Curtin Law School, started the West Australian Student Law Review to provide a platform for peer-reviewed student writing to be published, graduated on the Vice-Chancellor's list, completed her honours year while working full-time as a Judge's Associate for Supreme Court Justice Vaughan, won numerous course awards throughout her degree and has co-written a law book, all before turning 25. Claudia, I am consistently filled with awe at the amazing powerhouse of a woman that you are. You are wise, strong, and an amazing role model and advocate for other women and regional kids. And I consistently burst with pride and mum brags at the woman you are. My son Jack is currently competing Year 12 and who, after many tumultuous years in a school system that was never really designed for a young man like him, has shown true strength of character and this year has managed to wallpaper our fridge with commendations for his achievements in his courses. He works 2 jobs, has the savings mentality of a young Warren Buffett and is a kind and caring young man with an entrepreneurial spirit that is inspiring and may well place me in a lovely nursing home in my twilight years, or so he tells me. He has been part of our family financial decisions since his early teens, chose our family home with me, purchased his own car, phone and computer at 16 and is always ready with a loving and comforting hug, words of support and words that make me laugh till I cry. Jack, I am so incredibly proud of who you are, how far you have come, and watch with admiration and pride as you come into your own as the wonderful and hilarious young man you are. Today I come to this place a teacher, and the irony is not lost on me that having now left the profession, my life continues to be run by bells. Teaching is a profoundly rewarding profession, but I must confess I did not choose to be a teacher. I chose to be a parent and then chose to study teaching as it seemed to me a career that would allow me to both work and be a parent, with the ability to keep the same school hours as my children, or so I thought. It is merely a very surprising and happy accident that I found myself in love with teaching. My years of teaching have been some of the most rewarding and fulfilling years of my life. This is due in most part to the students, WA's regional kids. Many years ago, before I was a teacher, I sat in a school assembly at a primary school my daughter was attending and listened to the speech of a retiring teacher in which she shared her teaching philosophy. It was this: she made it her duty to find something to love in every child that walked through her classroom door. This compassionate, child-centred approach stayed with me, and I brought that ethos into my own teaching. And let me tell you, even when demonstrating their absolute worst, it is incredibly easy to find something to love in every student when you are actively seeking their best attributes. Or, as my old Geraldton High School motto states, the seeker finds. I would urge every teacher to consider adopting this approach. It enriches your own experience and means every student receives the very best you have to offer them. It is worth keeping in mind that for some students, you may well be the only positive encounter they experience on any given day. I have a great love of teaching, but I cannot deny that being an educator is also challenging. The pressures, expectations and workload are great, and the appreciation can be limited. Accountability and administrative measures have increased the workload in teachers, who will tell you they often find themselves juggling these requirements and the quality of the content of their teaching. Make no mistake, teachers care about students and the quality of education they deliver to your children. We care about your kids. We lose sleep over your children. We shed tears over them. We fight for them behind closed doors to ensure they're given a fair go. As my 17-year-old son recently pointed out, traditionally the education system was designed to meet the workforce needs of industrialisation. Today's world is a far different place, and much of the jobs and needs of both the world of today and tomorrow are significantly changed, or yet to be fully realised or imagined. Education should and must reflect these changes, and for this reason, it is pleasing to be part of a government that recognises this and is investing $136 million in new STEM classrooms and resources to prepare students for the jobs of the future. Moreover, education is more than a mere mechanism for churning out a workforce. Quality education will help create our deep thinkers, our carers, our innovators, our creators, our lateral thinkers and problem solvers. There is opportunity to apply best practice research to improve education, just as we do with science-based developments in areas such as vaccinations. Investment in education will reward us many-fold and must be at the core of what we do. We know that with education comes better health, improved life expectancy, reduced experiences of violence, higher salaries and greater levels of home ownership, just to name a few positive outcomes. Innovation and research require traditional skills along with exploration, creativity and minds that have been encouraged to remain playful, inquisitive and unafraid of failure because they have been taught to view failure as a learning experience and a step closer to success. I invite all those charged with planning our curriculum and education models to consider how best to achieve this end to ensure kids have lively, explorative and engaging learning experiences. The proliferation of the use of digital devices amongst our young people has seen the emergence of a concerning issue, the pornification of our young people's lives. The ready access to all manner of internet pornography and pornographic images, the large body of which is harmful or unrepresentative of human love, intimacy and respectful relationships, is highly concerning. Young people simply do not have the cognitive capacity or life experience to adequately process the images to which they are being exposed. Schools have an important role to play here in educating our young people as to respectful relationships, healthy body image, healthy human intimacy, and the vitally important concept of consent, indeed enthusiastic consent. Thus, I am pleased this government has made an election commitment to expand the Respectful Relationships program to address these matters. The McGowan Labor government has also invested significantly in public education infrastructure and classroom resources across the state. It is heartening to see the investments in our schools, the additional support for students in classrooms, the commitment to quality education in regions, and the development of the Centre for Excellence in the explicit teaching of literacy. Additionally, the McGowan government is delivering a $104 million boost to student support and wellbeing and 100 additional psychologists in WA schools over the next 4 years. Such welcome initiatives will provide more assistance for the significant numbers of students presenting with mental health issues, supporting those experiencing anxiety, depression or disengagement from school. On the issue of mental health, I again represent the average. 1 in 5 West Australians experience mental health issues in any given year. For this reason, I am a vocal advocate for normalising conversations around mental health as an effective means by which to encourage people to understand this health challenge as a normal human experience and as an important driver to encourage people to seek appropriate support. I offer my respect and great thanks to the member for Coburn, David Scaife, for his frank and open account of his experiences of his own mental health challenges in his inaugural speech in the other place, and to the member for Mining and Pastoral Region, the Honourable Peter Foster, for speaking of his struggles with anxiety in his inaugural speech here last week. It is particularly important for men who are so often conditioned to value stoicism over vulnerability and openness to normalise conversations around mental health. Over the years, my own brother, whose long undiagnosed mental health condition led to his self-medicating, a suicide attempt and a number of mental health crises, has highlighted for my family the gaps in our mental health services, particularly in regional areas. The more remotely one lives, the more problematic this becomes. At the peak of my brother's most recent episode, the trauma of attempting to access timely assistance remains with me, and the inability to access immediate support left my family helpless and feeling that my brother's death would likely come before assistance did. I am relieved to share here today that once he was finally able to access the support of mental health professionals, along with his own willingness to participate in his recovery, he is now part of a support system that has him well and truly on the path to recovery. However, the scars of the experience run through our family. And again, the importance of reflection upon experience is vital if we are to operate in a space of better prevention and early treatment that intervenes before crisis strikes. Additionally, I would like to touch briefly upon the problem we have with the criminalising of mental health and the consequential high rates of imprisonment of those self-medicating due to mental health struggles and trauma. Here, I'd like to pay my respects to the family of Yamaji woman, who for cultural reasons I will refer to as JC, who was shot dead in Geraldton after her family called police seeking assistance in transferring her to hospital, as she was, as her family described, experiencing difficulty after being released from prison. This tragic outcome points to an urgency in the need to examine this problem and how we might best adopt a significant paradigm shift to support those in our community who are suffering and those who are self-medicating. We must be unafraid to rethink our approach and to challenge some of the long-held ideas that persist despite defying reason or common sense. Here I acknowledge the important work of Health Minister Roger Cook and then Police Minister Michelle Roberts for developing a range of initiatives that focus on prevention, early intervention, treatment and support, and law enforcement. Resulting initiatives such as the 18-month pilot of active recovery teams in 10 metropolitan and regional locations to bridge the gap between clinical mental health services inside hospitals and the community-based organisations who provide care outside of hospitals. An additionally positive development is the creation of step-up, step-down mental health services throughout the state, providing early, outside hospital support for those experiencing mental health challenges. Providing alternatives to emergency departments for people with mental health, alcohol and other drug issues is vital, and I note it is a key priority area identified in the McGowan Government's Sustainable Health Review and State Priorities. I also note the Mental Health Commission is looking into gaps in alcohol and other drug crisis intervention. I look forward to their recommendations and the important work that I am confident Mental Health Minister, the Honourable Stephen Dawson, will contribute in this space. For over a year now, the world has endured the challenge and tragedy that is the COVID pandemic. It has taken lives, separated families, lovers and friends, placed our frontline workers under insufferable stress, stretched health services to well beyond their limits, seen the loss of jobs, homes, and caused much pain, suffering, instability and uncertainty. It is important that we recognise the outstanding work of the Australian unions and the Australian Labor Party in protecting our most vulnerable and securing the provision of JobKeeper and JobSeeker payments to both assist the people of our workforce to endure the impact of COVID and to support the Australian economy. To direct the credit for those initiatives to anyone else, or for anyone else to attempt to accept the credit for those initiatives, would be akin to attempting to pass the homework of another off as your own. The Australian Services Union, along with other Australian unions, campaigned relentlessly for a wage subsidy for workers to ensure members' jobs were protected during the global pandemic. Prior to this, Prime Minister Morrison refused to consider a wage subsidy. However, the determination and unrelenting efforts of the union won out, and that victory is reflected in an economy that has stood up well against the impact of the COVID pandemic. Here in Western Australia, I would like to thank our Premier Mark McGowan for his incredible management of our state. It is by no mistake that he has been informally awarded a light-hearted title that is paternal in nature. His steadfast, sensible, consistent and very human approach to keeping WA safe and strong has achieved just that. The proof is in the rich, healthy, robust state we remain and the fact that we remain the engine room of our nation. Here, I also extend my gratitude to Health Minister Roger Cook for his continued outstanding management of the COVID pandemic that is measured, science-based and attentive and responsive to expert health advice. A concept that is valued among the education fraternity is transferable knowledge, the capacity to pick up knowledge and experience gained in one area and apply it to another. It is my sincere hope that the experience and knowledge of COVID is transferable in this way, that those who were locked out, those who found or now find themselves essentially stateless for an indeterminate period, those being kept apart from loved ones, have discovered a heightened empathy for our refugees and asylum seekers suffering under the cruel practices of offshore processing and indefinite detention. The dehumanising cruelty of these federal policies must end, and I call upon the federal government to cease this needlessly cruel practice. My deep concern for our long history of disregard for the natural environment again places me amongst the average. According to the recent Australia Speaks data, the majority of Australians today are concerned about the issue of climate change. Our collective inaction on global warming places a significant responsibility upon us all here today to be dynamically proactive and innovative in our solutions and the efforts we must take to deal with natural disasters and many challenges resulting from that inaction. The strategic end is surely imminent for stranded assets such as oil and thermal coal, and we must be prepared to take the extreme structural pivot required to bring about this change. Investment in wind and solar, bioenergy and the hydrogen market must take precedence. We must remain alert to opportunities in the clean energy market and invest in research and development, be a state of innovation and early uptake in terms of infrastructure to provide for the production and utilisation of clean energy and downstream processing. As one about to celebrate the great privilege of achieving a half-century later this month, I again join the average and can confess to feeling a bit average at times too. Just over 40% of the people I represent in the agricultural region are aged 50 or over. I can say with great certainty that comes with age that from all of life's challenges, tragedies and disasters, we must learn, change and adapt if there are to be any ensuing positives from the experience. If we do not do these things, history repeats upon us and we suffer the heartburn of that which has already been suffered. As a regional member of this Parliament, I am pleased to note the McGowan Labor government has provided a masterclass in how to spend effectively in regional Western Australia, having spent more money in the regions than any previous government in our state's history. This is unsurprising, given the Labor Party itself was born of workers from the bush, the regions, the country, everyday workers seeking better wages and conditions. We are the original regional party. It is in our origin story and it is in our fundamentally egalitarian values that grew out of our bush heritage. It is thick and fast in our values that place people and a fair go at the centre of all we do. The West Australian State Division of the Australian Labor Party was formed at a trade union congress in Coolgardie, just down the road from my birthplace in Kalgoorlie in 1899. In our regions today, there is increasing diversity, improvements in education, the growth of industries and a greater acceptance of progressive social values. This is reflected in the recent election result, in which regional voters have shown their support in unprecedented numbers. The experience of COVID and rapidly rising house prices and housing shortages has people again looking towards regional living. COVID has shown us that traditional models of work can be adapted and working remotely is possible and indeed can prove favourable. It is important that we are mindful of creating opportunity in the form of key infrastructure to allow people to live regionally and to do so knowing they can readily access key services. It is also worth contemplating the value of regional locations as a second seat of government to improve outcomes for regional communities. As the prospect of electoral reform is being explored, I am mindful that many of us here are regional members and bring the value, knowledge and experience of regional living. It is essential that there is an appropriate mechanism to advocate for the necessary human services for rural, regional and remote communities, such as disabilities, mental health, drug and alcohol and family violence services. A community mechanism operating in a similar vein to regional development commissions who advocate for the economic development needs of regional communities. A significant part of our agricultural region, more than 40,000 square kilometres, was impacted by Cyclone Seroja. It devastated communities, families, businesses and individuals, and there remains work to be done to assist these people to restore their lives, homes, infrastructure and livelihoods. It has been a great privilege to witness the various groups, individuals and volunteers collaborate to help our neighbours in need. However, there were also roadblocks to the manner by which we could support and check in on those impacted, most notably the failure of telecommunications that left people vulnerable and unable to communicate or access help and support. This has highlighted an issue that remains problematic. Telecommunication towers absented of generators to allow them to continue to function beyond their short backup battery life in the event of power loss shut us off from each other. From my home in Geraldton, I relied on contact from a friend in Cunderdin for information and updates on the impact of the cyclone. Poor telecommunications and connectivity are an ongoing issue across our regions and one in which the federal government must exercise its federal responsibility. It is an issue I am determined to pursue during my time here in this place. Mobile coverage and internet connectivity should and must be provided as a reliable and uninterrupted service as a matter of both the safety and well-being of regional communities and as a commercial imperative, allowing all to compete irrespective of geography. I am doggedly determined to see our government work with the federal government to resolve this matter for our rural, regional and remote communities. It will unlock opportunities in the use of technology for business, health and well-being, education and in attracting and retaining populations. Export markets are also an important part of our agricultural sector, and while any form of economic coercion must be strongly resisted, I am pleased to note Premier Mark McGowan's stance on building positive relationships with our trading partners such as China. Diversification in trading partners is an additionally important measure to ensure the ongoing stability and success of our trading sector. The success of our agriculture and food sector is intrinsically linked to overseas markets. Agriculture is Western Australia's second largest export industry. We export approximately 80% of our agricultural produce. Over the past decade, around 70% of that trade supplied Asian markets, with China, Vietnam and Indonesia being some of our largest markets. Our agri-food market is ideally positioned to supply produce that is both sustainably produced and ethically produced. Our state is one of the most disease and pest-free agricultural production areas in the world, a status we must vigilantly protect via strict quarantine requirements, just as we have worked vigilantly to keep our state free of COVID via our hard border and quarantine measures. This, along with innovation, research and development, will ensure our market remains a significant part of our own food supply chain and continue to be a substantive contributor to the Australian economy that it is today. Our primary producers are numbered among the best in the world, and this is an identity worth recognition and celebration. If Western Australia is the engine room of Australia, WA's agriculture and food sector is both one of the engine rooms of our state and the lifeblood of our rural and regional communities. We must focus our attention upon creating and training a steady and consistent supply of workers for this sector and to attracting people to living and working in these communities, if we are to continue to help keep the engine well running and well serviced. The best time for us to take action on climate change and global warming was over 40 years ago. The next best time is now. Our sluggish approach to taking action has resulted in the need for us to act more expediently and innovatively than ever before. There is no more time to smirk rather than set targets or to pander to players who have ignored science and continue to invest heavily in unsustainable practices and stranded assets, willfully placing profits over people and planet. It has been 10 years since Julia Gillard became Prime Minister of Australia. One of her government's major achievements was the introduction of the carbon pricing mechanism, one that saw emissions from companies subject to the scheme drop by 7%. Today, we are fortunate to have the forward-thinking efforts of Hydrogen Minister, the Honourable Alana McTiernan. Western Australia, a state typically locked in a boom or bust cycle, is well placed to become the land of the endless boom if we, as we have begun to do in recent years, harness our abundant natural and renewable resources and work from the front foot to be global leaders in the clean, green energy market. Here, the investment we place in innovation and research will reward us manyfold and allow us to position ourselves as global leaders and suppliers of the clean energy market. It is well past time for the lump of coal to leave the building. As countries look to progressively decrease their emissions, the future trade in energy is likely to increasingly include trade in low and zero emissions energy. Western Australia has significant renewable resources, a well-established track record of exporting energy and long-standing trading relationships with key energy importers. I am pleased to note that Oakajee, north of Geraldton in the agricultural region, is one such identified potential location for hydrogen production and export. Western Australia is well positioned to become a significant exporter of low or zero emissions energy. We are on the cusp of playing an important role in the global decarbonisation efforts. It is indeed an exciting time to be representing the agricultural region and the people of Western Australia. I look forward to playing my part in building a future towards which our children can look with optimism. As is customary, I would like to conclude by offering my thanks to the many hands that have carried me to this place. To begin, I would like to note that participating in the election campaign has been an incredibly rewarding experience, not only due to the resulting victory, but because of the amazing opportunity to work alongside like-minded people, all working towards a common goal in which they genuinely believed. It has been a great honour and a highlight of my life to date. My thanks first and foremost to Premier Mark McGowan and the WA Labor team. Thank you to the incredible campaign team of Tim Picton, Ali Whittaker and David Cann. My gratitude and thanks to the voters of the agricultural region, many of whom voted Labor for the first time. We will not let you down. I also owe much gratitude to the Honourable Darren West. But for your work in building the Geraldton branch, your time, effort and friendship, I would never have found the confidence to put my name forward as a candidate. Thank you for your faith in me and for elevating my belief in what I think is possible. That is an incredible gift and I'm very grateful. Thanks also to the candidates for each electorate in the agricultural region. Brad Willis in Roe, Michelle Nelson in Central Wheatbelt, Barney Norton in Moore, and new member for Geraldton, the first woman to represent the seat of Geraldton, Lara Dalton. It has been a great privilege to work alongside each of you, and I credit my being here today with the hard work you have done in each of your respective electorates. In Geraldton, I would also like to thank retiring member Laurie Graham, the ultimate gentleman of WA politics. Laurie, thank you for all you have done for our region, for the kindness you have shown me, and for the abundance of advice. I hope my own service does your legacy justice. Thanks to Margie Robinson for your work during the campaign, your friendship, and for being your incredibly capable, intelligent and knowledgeable self. I would most certainly be wandering in the wilderness without you. There is also an incredible team working behind the scenes in Donna Plummer, Jodie Ingram, Judy Riggs and Jeff Cannon. These people are the quiet heroes behind our public success. Thanks to each of you. Thanks also to Adam Dusty, the hardest working door knocker and most knowledgeable political mind to land West Side in Geraldton in a long time. Thank you for your hard work and mateship. To my family, you have supported me, cared for me, attended events, handed out how-to votes, believed in me, and now share in this honour with me today that I have as the first member of our family to be a Member of Parliament. Mum and Dad, I love you both dearly and thank you for the countless ways you have shown me love and support. To my daughter Claudia, thank you for your support, the ever-wise advice, and for flying in from Perth to Geraldton on the day to man the Dongra booth with me. To my son Jack, thank you for encouraging me to go for it, for hammering up signs, for all the hugs and words of encouragement. Love you, mate. To my sister Karen, for being my greatest supporter and best friend. I do not ever want to contemplate where I would be were it not for you. To my brother-in-law Mark Rowe, what a guy. He voted Labor for the first time ever, completely threw his support behind me and even drove to Nationals territory in Northampton to man the polling booth solo there. I owe you gratitude for that and so much more. To my brother Todd, for always believing in me more than I ever believed in myself, and for being the best and funniest brother I could have ever wished for growing up. To my dear friend Rochelle and her husband Noddy, thank you for your constant support, friendship and wise counsel. I love you both dearly. To my friends from work and life who offered words and messages of support, thank you. Your every gesture has meant the world to me. To Ivan DeBoy and the I team, as they're known in Dongra, Louis and Elsie in Dongra, thank you for leading the charge there. We won Dongra. And finally to the Geraldton branch of WA Labor and the many, many volunteers who contributed along the way. It is appropriate that I should end here in this space of thanks and gratitude. Thus, I conclude by thanking you, President, and my colleagues for indulging me this time. This very average regional West Australian woman promises to roll up her sleeves and work exceptionally hard for the agricultural region and the people of Western Australia.